So all thoughts in this review are based on a single theatrical viewing and are subject to change at a later date. This review will contain full spoilers, you have been warned, and as this is an opinion piece, your satisfaction in watching the video is not guaranteed. Okay, so this isn't the quickest review to be released about a new film, but hey, better late than...
Blanche! Pregnant!
Thank you, Blanche. Now on to the film, where I downgrade my status as a reviewer even further by taking that wonderfully controversial stance of, meh, it was okay. This is not at all to say that the film is bad. If pressed, I would say it's good, but not great, and unfortunately that lackluster quality makes the movie all the more disappointing for me. But before I lose you, lovely audience, entirely, before I even get out of the gate, let's start with the good stuff. As is the usual for Pixar and Disney, the animation is wonderful, right down to the logo work. The action scenes are fast-paced, with great shots and angles. With the film dealing with supers coming back, we get to see a ton of different powers, and how those powers pay off one another in fight scenes, which is a lot of fun. The fact that Violet is more comfortable with her powers means we get to see her using them not just offensively now, but offensively too, and I loved that. And with the passage of time comes improved CGI, so Frozone's ice looks amazing. There are some neat ideas presented here, like the motivation of the villain. Unfortunately, is yet another twist villain. Surprise, surprise. Seriously, Disney, you peaked with this with Moana, now find a new gimmick. But the villain himself thinks that having supers back will weaken regular people because they'll use supers as a crutch, the way she believes her father did, is an interesting idea. In the motel after the fight with the Underminer, Helen and Bob have an argument about what's right and what's illegal with regard to superheroing, and in our climate of populist movements, grassroots protesting, and countless examples of governments having some of the people in mind and not all of the people, the conversation about what's law and what's right is a topical one to have. Indeed, there is really good stuff in here, it just doesn't build to anything, in my opinion. For example, the idea that supers were initially driven underground thanks to collateral damage, and Winston wants to provide insurance to cover that, and the use of the body camera to show how much work goes into being a super, and then none of that is ever brought up again. We see Hamlin do damage when saving the bullet train, and it's never addressed. Means that one would pay for that. There's no argument about whether everyone who has to now be under Wilson for that insurance, and if that makes superheroing corporate. And there appears to be no resistance to supers coming back outside of the first 10 minutes and the villain. And that really bothers me. There's no counter-protesters, no angry screaming news anchor opposite Helen's interview, so I'm left wondering why supers going into hiding was such a big deal in the first place. Speaking of the first film, since this also had a guy wanting supers' help and ended up with being a ruse to kill them off, why are we so quick to trust Wilson again? Wilson, at least in the eyes of his sister, brings up an interesting idea of wanting to live in the past. He even has the supers first to visit him in their old costumes. And I thought that was leading up to something interesting with the whole family working as a team as they were in the opening, mostly. And how that was better than the lone wolf work Helen was doing in the middle, and that would be symbolized by the changing of her suits at the end. But nope. Anyway, back to Winston and the implied wanting to have the heroes as they were when they clearly aren't. Especially with the last film's plot of Syndrome getting rid of so many supers. We only see new supers now, feeling confident enough to come out thanks to Elastigirl's exploits, which does give us a great connection between Helen and Boyd that I enjoyed very much, with Helen kind of taking on a mentor role to a younger female super. However, what if there had been a scene with Winston looking for others like Gazerbeam, and of course not finding them? Or a clip of people wondering if a certain super shown in the clip on the island in the last film would show up and then wondering why they don't. There could have been a touching moment where Bob tells Winston and his sister that even if supers hadn't gone underground, it wouldn't have mattered because Gazerbeam couldn't have come to help their father. He died at the hands of Syndrome, revealing that supers aren't these indestructible perfect people who should be put up on pedestals to be protectors and then shunned whenever they make a mistake. They're just people with talents trying to do what's right. And with the idea that they are just people that go through life like everyone else, there could have been a confrontation that things are different now, especially how Helen and Bob are different now. Sure, they could have shown how Frozone had changed as well by perhaps giving his wife something to do besides being a voice off screen again as a callback to the first film. But with Helen and Bob, that change is more stark because they have children now. They have different priorities than when they were single or newly married. And into that, of course, is that those children have powers, which brings us to the Jack-Jack subplot. And once again, there is good stuff here. Most of the comedy comes into play in this part. There is a great fight with a raccoon. It gives us Edna, who is delightful and needs longer scenes if we ever get a third film. However, this too doesn't tie into anything else. Jack having no control over his powers doesn't bring up the idea of civilian safety or property damage, leading back to the insurance idea. Him having so many more powers than his parents or siblings doesn't allow a peek into the world's lore by discussing how power inheritance works, or whether non-supers can have super children, which would bring up the idea of how one handles a child who is different from what society considers normal, another topical conversation by the by, and what you do with a kid who has powers that you or they might not understand. Again, a call back to the first film with supers underground. Who do you look for help in that arena? And again, a tie back with Void, who finally feels comfortable with who she is thanks to Helen being out and showing her that others are like her and not to be ashamed of that. On the flip side, there could have been more than a passing mention of the idea that a super doesn't have to use their powers to help others, rather than simply being a weak argument from Bob to convince Helen to go back to work. And why does Bob have to suck at parenting? Number one, this is an overused trope that in my opinion needs to be dropped in the recycling bin and turned into something more interesting. And number two, Bob has already dealt with two superpowered children before, and since everyone initially thought Jack had no powers, this implies both Dash and Violet showed their skills at a younger age than he did. And why can't Violet and Dash have more interesting things going on with them than Math and Tony? Ugh. Okay, to sum up this ramble-turned-rant, I enjoyed the film as an action romp. It was nice to see the characters again, the animation was great, things were well-paced, the new powers were cool, Edna is still the boss. But in the end, I was looking for more depth with the ideas at hand than I got, and so ultimately I have come away disappointed. Was it bad? No. Was it worth the 14-year wait as the intros promised? Not to me. Okay, so if there's anyone left or if I dare to disparage a Pixar film, thanks so much for watching and feel free to stick around for more. And if you'd like, feel free to explore my channel further where I have posted my own animations because we like throwing stones from glass houses around here. Thanks again everyone and I'll see you in the next video.